Imagine this. A foreign man flies in from another country to work at a dairy in Idaho. Let's say he's here from Mexico. He's here legally, but his visa has one employer's name printed on it. Just one, and that employer name is the only reason he's allowed to stand on American soil. So think about what that means on an average Monday in Idaho. That foreign man, he can't quit because quitting means he'll be illegal by dinner time. He can't take a better offer from the operation 10 miles down the road either because that offer isn't on his new paperwork. He can't complain about the hours, can't turn down a job nobody wants, can't ask for a raise. His boss isn't just his boss anymore. His boss is now the reason he isn't deported. And that boss can even put the foreign man in a bunkhouse and bill him rent for it out of the check the boss already writes. So imagine you're this foreigner who just got here to work on an Idaho dairy. But now you're housed by the man, paid by the man. Essentially, you're legally owned by the man in every way that matters short of the word. That's what's in a new bill in Congress, H.R. 9535, introduced at the end of June with something like 400 farm lobbyists standing behind it. And these are the same people who are pushing cheap slave labor here in Idaho and other states. So what does this new bill do? It builds a permanent class of cheap slave labor out of the people who are already here illegally and even imports more behind them. There was a word for that in colonial America. They called it indentured servanthood, but free men got rid of it because you can't run a republic with a slave class underneath it. And now our own Republican Congress is trying to rebuild it one subsection at a time and calling it food security. Shocking, right? And the wage floor in the bill becomes our son's new wage ceiling because no employer on earth is going to pay more for work when the cheaper man is sitting right there next to him and legally can't complain. Idaho Congressman Mike Simpson is, of course, shockingly, a co-sponsor of the bill, and because, he's been pushing this type of stuff for 27 years. And when he's not trying to get amnesty and push cheap slave labor, he's out there making cringeworthy dance videos on social media, embarrassing Idaho. But I digress. So what's actually in it? Say you came here illegally. Under this new bill, all you've got to do is claim that you worked at a farm for about 6 hours a day for 90 days over 2 years, which is basically a summer job. You do that and you're legal to keep working just how I described, bound to the guy who hired you illegally in the first place. We used to call this slave labor. Nobody goes home under this new bill. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody gets kicked out. There's no fine. And guess who gets to sign off on that work you claim you did? The employer. That's the same guy who broke the law hiring you in the first place. And then this new bill locks those records up so no investigator can ever come looking at either one of you. Since 1986, there's been a rule: if you bring in foreign workers, you've got to pay a premium, a certain wage, and it's set higher than minimum wage on purpose because the whole idea was to take the savings out of it. So say hiring a guy overseas costs you the same as hiring the kid down the road, why bother? So you hire the kid. Well, this bill guts that. It lowers the number, it caps how much it can go up, and it lets it go down, and then writes that whole formula into federal law so no president can fix it on his own. It would now take an act of Congress. And here's the part they don't want you to know about. That wage floor wouldn't be automatic every year. Every year, the Department of Labor has to decide whether foreign labor is actually hurting American workers. If they say it is, the floor stays. If they say it isn't, it shuts off for the whole year. So everybody would now have to drop to federal minimum wage, which is what, $7 and some change? So picture what that looks like in your house. Say your kid's 19 working at a dairy in Jerome. Say he wants to stay in the valley but buy a place in a few years, get married, the whole American dream thing. Well, right now he's making $17 or $18 an hour, not because his boss is generous, but because that floor makes him. Then some Tuesday in Washington, a bureaucrat at the Labor Department, some guy your kid will never meet, signs a piece of paper saying, hey, there's no harm here. Hiring foreigners is awesome. Nobody calls your house. Nobody calls your son. It doesn't make the news. It's not on the radio. And your son's wage is now legally allowed to sit at 7.25 federal minimum wage because the man standing next to him at the milking parlor is on a visa with one employer's name on it. That guy can't quit. He can't negotiate. He can't walk down the road for better money. He takes whatever he gets offered because the other option is getting on a plane and getting deported back to Mexico. Well, your son can't compete with that. My son couldn't. Nobody could. So he does what any red-blooded American would do. He leaves. He goes somewhere else, and maybe you'll see him at Christmas time. So that's the trick. They leave the wage floor on the books so Mike Simpson and other people who are behind this bill can go on the radio and swear he protected the American worker. But then they write it in such a way that it can be shut off every year without a vote or a debate and nobody's name is on it. And the people who get to flip that switch, guess what? They're lobbied by those 400 outfits full time every day forever. And if that sounds like doom and gloom over one dairy job, it's not just a guess. We've already seen this happen over and over and over. We've seen this movie before for generations. Meatpacking used to be a union job in places like Iowa or Nebraska. A man could support a family with it. He could put his kids through school. He could buy a house even if he only had a high school diploma, and he could even get buried in the county he was born in. Kind of the American dream, right? But his wage was already under pressure by the early 80s. Plants were moving out of the cities. Contracts were getting broken. It was kind of a slow slide. Then Reagan came in and signed his amnesty deal in 86, and that slide turned into a full-on cliff drop. We had 3 million people become essentially legal overnight. The promised enforcement never happened, and all of these meat packers suddenly had all the labor they'd ever need at whatever price they decided to pay. And the town went with it. Schools consolidated, Main Street emptied, the churches that used to seat 400 now have 40 people show up on Christmas. Nobody voted for that directly. I didn't. You didn't. There was no bill called the Destroy Nebraska Act. It just got cheaper a quarter at a time, and now the grandkids are off in another state, and nobody's left who remembers what the town used to look like in the good old days. That's what happens when the wage goes and Americans get replaced by foreigners. Heritage America goes away also. And here we have Congress today about to run the same play again on purpose. But they'll tell you Americans won't do these jobs. Well, if you run the tape backwards, that wasn't always true. Certainly not before 1986, because when the wage fell first, the workers left second as a result. But these same people still quote the collapse back at you as proof it was inevitable. Well, if this bill passes and we flip that switch and drop the floor to federal minimum wage, of course Americans don't want to take a slave man's wages. And that's all by design to build their permanent slave class in America. But this bill isn't the whole problem. You could kill it tomorrow and they'll file it again in the spring under a different name. And this isn't about farmers either per se. I mean, the guy milking 80 cows in Goody didn't write this. The lobbyists for the guy milking 8,000 cows did. So what's actually going on is that multimillionaires are getting made in DC, and the people making them aren't from Rupert or Burley or Nampa. They are lobbyists who own our politicians, so they own the outcome. And Democrats, of course, want this too, but for different reasons, because they said diversity is our strength or something like that. So you voted for deportation and you're getting a guest worker expansion amnesty program. You voted for the American worker, and instead they're pushing foreign replacement workers. Now, a nation is two things at once. It's a people and it's a place. You pull the people out and you've got dirt with a property line around it. You take the place away and those people scatter, and suddenly they're nobody's neighbors anymore. So Idaho Congressman Mike Simpson has spent the last 27 years treating Idaho like it's only the dirt, only the place. To him, this is just acreage. It's yield per acre, head per barn, labor cost per hundredweight. In that math, man is just an input, and inputs in this case get sourced wherever they run cheapest. And if the cheapest one happens to be a slave worker from Mexico who legally cannot quit, well, that's just how it is. The spreadsheet doesn't have a column for that. The spreadsheet also has no column for the school that closed, or your kid or my kid or a grandkid who had to move away because there were no jobs here that paid, or for the pew that sits empty on Sunday that used to be full. Those aren't costs to him, to guys like Mike Simpson. They don't show up anywhere he looks. He gets to just fly home 2 or 3 times a year, shoot cringeworthy, embarrassing social media dance videos, and then fly back to DC where the people who write his bills for him take him to dinner and tell him he's doing the Lord's work for agriculture. That's his whole life, and that's the job as guys like Mike and his buddies understand it. But somebody's family is buried in that county, right? Your kids and my kids and grandkids should be able to stay here. And that's the whole thing we're fighting about, whether an Idaho kid can work on a dairy, marry a girl from the valley, buy a house on that wage, and be buried where his family is. Whether he can stay here and raise his family here. And Simpson is trying to trade all of that, and he's been doing it for years for lobbyist applause and a seat at the big ag table. And he'll be back in November asking for your vote again. So there's a side to take here, though. There's the American who wants to work and raise a family in the town he lives in. And there's the hundreds and hundreds of lobbyists who would rather import a foreign man who can't quit, can't argue, and can't leave because he's cheaper to employ and he'll never cost them a thing. Now, that foreign man isn't necessarily your enemy. He's just the tool they're using against American workers. Simpson picked his side. He put his name on it in June on this bill on paper in D.C., and nobody in Idaho got a vote on it. Not directly anyway. So the bill number is HR 9535. Write it down, call his Idaho Falls office, and don't let him or his staffers talk about farmers. They've got 10 minutes plus memorized on helping the farmer. Instead, ask them one thing. Does the wage floor for an American worker go down under this bill? Yes or no?